If you hike up to the peak of Angel Island, you look out west and you see the reddish color of the Golden Gate Bridge stretched between the beautiful city of San Francisco and the Marin Headlands, which is open space and just gorgeous green hills. And straight ahead is the whole Pacific Ocean.
I think for me, there were a couple things that I felt when I visited Angel Island that first time. One was definitely a sense of shame that it had taken me that long. But once I visited it, I felt an instant sense of connection to the site.
My great-great-grandmother was detained on Angel Island in the early 1900s because she was a picture bride coming to America. So this was completely new news. I had no idea.
But then to think about people having braved a long and terrible journey in a boat across the Pacific, not knowing were they going to be admitted, were they going to be deported and sent back, landing on this place that to them I'm sure was not beautiful because they walked off the boat and into a prison.
In 2017, my colleagues and I in the Sol Quartet received an incredible grant to commission the Angel Island Oratorio from composer Huang Ruo. The piece was to be adapted from poetry carved by Chinese immigrants on the walls inside what served as a detention center from 1910 to 1940 on Angel Island.
It's able to tell a story that's really hard and something that we don't always want to hear. But it's so critical to actually making us whole, even if we don't even think that story is ours.
Seeing this part of our country's history that as an Asian American, as an immigrant, I didn't learn about in school, questioning why I didn't learn about it. So there's emotions related to anger as well.
And one of the poems was carved on the wall right next to a window, and the poem was saying, "I'm looking at Oakland, so close and I cannot get there. That is my destination." This was one of the Chinese poems carved at that location right next to the window to describe what that incarcerated person was looking at.
The first time I visited Angel Island, the detention center felt foreboding and dark. The poems in the walls were clearly visible and held a powerful expression of the feelings of the detainees, not only in the words, but also the strokes of the carvings. Though my parents were raised in wartime China, they didn't come to the United States until the 1960s, more than 2 decades after the Angel Island immigration station closed. Growing up in the US as a person of Asian descent, I faced a kind of racism that didn't fall into the black and white discussions that were happening at the time. For example, kids knew that the N-word was totally off limits, but they would call me chink and the teachers would just laugh it off. I didn't know about the history of Angel Island, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and other laws targeting Asian immigrants until I was in college at UC Berkeley. These laws were designed to protect citizens from what was often called the yellow peril, a moral, racial, and economic threat to the American way of life. I often think about how different the United States might have been without these laws. Del Sol commissioned the Angel Island Oratorio because this history is still largely unknown to the American public, and the timing just feels right. We are in a moment when the dialogue is opening up around the shame of a painful past, while at the same time, Asian culture is becoming more mainstream. K-pop sensation BTS is featured on Saturday Night Live. Michelle Yeoh is the first Asian woman to win the Oscar for Best Actress for Everything Everywhere All at Once. And in 2022, Chinese food is the most Googled cuisine in the United States. And yet, It's the same moment when racism against Asians boils to the surface in a climate that fosters brutal attacks on elders and nasty slurs hurled at everyday people, including myself. It's also the same moment that we are facing ongoing immigration issues and are struggling to find a fair and dignified way for people to seek entry into our country. This podcast isn't just about a bilingual oratorio for string quartet and chamber choir. Actually, this whole thing was never just one idea. We've often referred to Angel Island as a project because there's so much we have done beyond the original commission. There's Angel Island, the piece, the place, the concert series, the podcast, the production, the last hoist and pose, there's this, there's that. So how do we even begin to share all of the many ripples of this project? How do we invite you into the story of Angel Island if it's your very first time hearing about it? And why is this story from the past relevant right now? From the Sol Quartet, this is Sounds Current, Angel Island. I'm Charlton Lee.
Let me know everyone should be recording. I think we are good on all levels.
Wait, am I prompting these, or
I think that's the idea. Yeah.
the idea? So
I can prompt you to prompt these. As I
Yeah, give me a prompt.
often do.
Okay. So we're here today with the members of the Sol Quartet, and we're sitting in our basement room turned podcast studio.
And this is a pretty normal occurrence for us to kind of upturn the Del Sol house into recording studio / whatever it needs to be. So
I'm Ben Creeth. I'm one of the two violinists in Sol Quartet.
I'm Hae-young Yoon, and I am a violinist.
hi, I'm Catherine Bates. I'm the cellist of the Del Sol Quartet since 2010.
I'm Charlton Lee, and I'm the violist of the Sol Quartet and founding member.
And Soul
All hail.
Survivor.
All
Soul
hail
survivor.
to the founding member.
The soul survivor. I started Del Sol in 1992 with a bunch of my fellow grad students. We wanted to try and play together for a summer festival, so we met over winter break and made a recording and then played a concert. We had so much fun doing that, we thought, hey, maybe we can continue on beyond the summer. Then came a dizzying period of rotating members, which finally stabilized in the late 1990s. And we have enjoyed a nice steady ride since then, with a focus towards contemporary music and pushing the boundaries of what is considered quartet playing.
I always like to retell the origin story of the Del Sol Quartet because that's what I do. So Charlton has a degree in math and physics. He graduated from University of California, Berkeley. And he wasn't entirely sure that that's the path that he wanted to go on. So he actually went to work for the Los Alamos Laboratory, and they sent him off to do an experiment at Fermilab in Chicago. He was working in experimental physics, and because he was the new member of the team, they had him on midnight shifts. So he would watch the particle accelerator, make sure nothing was combusting or going wrong. And because he was all alone, he started practicing a lot and started playing chamber music with other physicists. At a certain point, he realized that, hey, okay, I can practice 6-8 hours a day. And hey, this is a lot of fun. And hey, if I'm going to work this hard doing something, maybe I should do something that reaches a few more people than experimental physics. And the irony of that is he decided that that was going to be a contemporary music string quartet, because clearly that has mass appeal in a way that physics doesn't. But the quartet, I think, is founded on the principles that Charlton carried with him as a physicist. That sense of curiosity, that sense of exploration, of wanting to know what's possible, what's next, what have people not even thought about. And I think we are sort of narrowing into the true vision of the quartet, which is a sense of wanting to bring people together based on a sense of exploration, a sense of curiosity. Yeah, to share our music in a way that feels relevant and the joy of that.
So I grew up in a town north of here called Davis, that's a university town. My parents took me to the music department concerts from the time I was really little. So some of my earliest musical memories are actually of really strange music. And then the other thing that really influenced me musically was this barn called the Palms. It was a true barn. I mean, there were sheep that would wander in during the concerts, and they had hay bales. and pretzels. And I heard so much good music there. Folk music, bluegrass innovators, great blues and jazz musicians, people I still really admire. And the great thing about this barn was it was just a true community. They produced their own Shakespeare shows on off nights. That was the first time I ever appeared on stage, was wearing a fairy outfit made from dry cleaning bags.
Sounds like we know what our new costume is going to be.
Oh, yeah. The thing that I love about Del Sol that makes me feel at home here is we kind of have both going on. We do things ourselves, it's homemade. We do things that build community, reach our friends, and we're open to doing just like wild, strange, adventurous things. So it just feels like, oh yeah, that's what you do if you're a musician.
In the true Del Sol spirit of community and collaboration, the concept and vision for Angel Island would never have come to be without composer Huang Ruo.
Well, we first worked with Huang Ruo at the Santa Fe Opera.
Actually, can we dial that even further
Yeah, go
back?
for it.
This all comes back to He Young, because the first time I met Huang Ruo was at a Chiara concert, which He Young was a part of. And they were premiering Calligraphy, a quartet piece that was written for them by Huang Ruo. And we sat together in the concert and became sort of almost immediate friends. So that was kind of an auspicious start to our relationship.
And I just have to say, I do remember your energy after that concert. I have a very distinct memory of you being very excited.
And I remember you coming in and saying, I just went to this amazing concert. This is a piece we got to play. And we should check out this composer. And
I think it was January of 2011, CMA conference.
This is composer Huang Ruo.
I just wandered into this exhibition room where different chamber music ensembles or organizations having a booth to exhibit CDs and all kinds of stuff. Consciously, I was looking for, is there any other Asian Americans around in the room? Only found one, and that was Charlton. I believe we even spoke a little bit of Mandarin.
I attempted to.
Well, a few words.
It was a match made in musical heaven. Huang Ruo recalls he was immediately drawn to our work at Del Sol. And a few years later, we were doing a project for Santa Fe Opera of Huang Ruo's chamber music. His opera, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, was being given its American premiere, and it was almost all in Chinese. It was the first time I'd ever seen that in a Western-style opera. I just thought the way that he used the music to set the words was so powerful and appropriate. There's one thing that I personally have a hard time with is if you take Italian opera, which is very melismatic, and so if you have, in Italian, it seems appropriate. But if you say, I want to go to the store, it sounds very strange in English.
Have you considered switching your job into a singer?
Especially his Italian example. The text was fantastic.
I just blew out the levels on the mic, but yeah, okay.
Wait, weren't we talking about Angel Island?
Yeah, sorry. See, we went off on that tangent.
so we worked with Huang Ruo in, I believe it was 2015 at the Santa Fe Opera, doing collaborative chamber music. And I think that just really solidified for us. This is someone we want to work with. And we planted this idea. Charlton had known about the story of Angel Island and the poetry that was left behind. But we knew that it was going to be a massive project. And a massive project needs massive funding.
We'll come back to the massive funding bit in the next episode.
It's so true, right, that a lot of people, unfortunately, are not familiar with Angel Island's history. And sometimes Angel Island is referred to as the Ellis Island of the West.
This is Ed Tepper from the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation.
But what's important to remember about Angel Island was that it was created to serve as a detention center to enforce the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, as well as other exclusionary immigration policies that truly sought to keep Asians and Pacific Islanders from entering the U.S.
The Chinese Exclusion Act was a federal law signed by President Arthur in 1882. The law prohibited immigration of Chinese laborers and made it impossible for Chinese immigrants to become naturalized U.S. citizens. It was the first significant law restricting immigration into the United States. One of the surprises we discovered is that the controversy over the southern border of the US was not originally about keeping Mexicans out, but rather the Chinese.
What's also important to recognize is that the experience for immigrants was different if you were Asian versus if you were European. We know from all the historical accounts and from some of the oral histories that Asians had a much harder time on Angel Island compared to Europeans. They experienced longer periods of detention. They experienced more invasive medical exams, where oftentimes the Asian immigrants were forced to strip completely naked and to provide blood and stool samples so that the doctors could examine these and hopefully, in the doctor's eyes, find an excuse to potentially keep a person from entering the US due to a medical disease or medical condition.
The law made flimsy exceptions for merchants, teachers, students, travelers, and diplomats, basically classes with wealth and means, though status was hard to prove.
Being locked in detention and not knowing when you were going to be called forward to have to testify and engage in what was called a board of special inquiry, but really that's just a fancy term for an interrogation. In these boards of special inquiry, the immigration officials would ask the immigrants hundreds upon hundreds of questions, trying to verify their identity, whether they were one of the exempt classes. And these interrogations would sometimes last for hours or days.
One of the facts that I found particularly striking and would have been incredibly harrowing for the detainees is the fact that many of them were turned back. And from what I understand, a lot of the people had pretty much pawned their lives, borrowed under incredibly ridiculous interest rates to get the money to make the passage just to come here. And so if they were to be sent back, they would have been homeless, they would have been destitute, they possibly would have been a death sentence because they would just have had nothing and no recourse to recover that money. For me, it's like just imagining being locked in this place in kind of this limbo and not knowing whether or not I would be given an opportunity to come to the mainland versus being sent home and basically being ruined.
Absolutely, Charlton. Thanks for lifting that up. And we know from some of the oral histories that we've collected over the years that in certain cases, families would pool their money to send that one person, or an entire village would pool their money to send that one person. So imagine you were that one person traveling across the Pacific Ocean for 3 weeks in crowded, cramped, smelly conditions, and the weight of responsibility and expectation that was on your shoulders, that your family, your village had invested so much money in sending you here. And the exclusion rate is significant. About 20% of the immigrants who came through Angel Island were ultimately deported back to their home countries.
Well, first of all, even to have it be on the consciousness that immigration to this country on the West Coast for Asian Americans, for Chinese Americans, was a very different experience than you often read in the history books of everybody coming to America and you are greeted by the Statue of Liberty.
This is Andy Wong. Andy is many things: educator, arts advocate, community organizer, and Angel Island descendant. I asked Andy what she remembers about the first time she visited Angel Island.
I remember being really pissed. I just remember being really angry, hearing the way the story was told, and you could just see the place was neglected. It just made me really angry.
Right. I've never seen you angry.
Oh, yeah. I was pissed. So I feel like the story and how we tell it has been changing, and it will continue to change. It's just important that we open up those discussions.
Another one of our key Angel Island collaborators is poet Jenny Lim.
Well, if you're in San Francisco and you're interested in Chinese American culture and history, of course you know the name Jenny Lim.
Jenny is also an Angel Island descendant. Tell us a little bit about how the two of you met.
The first time I think was at the Chinese Historical Society of America. I believe it was the very first time that you performed as the Last Voice on Poets.
It was the first time that I performed with Flo Oi Wong, And we were not the last Khoisan poets at that point.
Was it fierce female poets they called
Yes. What it was Flo had come out as a poet in her 80s, and this was her first poetry book. And she asked me to write a blurb on her jacket, and I did. And so when she had her book launch at CHSA, Chinese Historical Society of America, she invited me to read with her. And we were so excited to hear our own dialect in the way that we were reading that we both said we should do more of this. And let's invite your sister, Nellie Wong. And then I said, well, yeah. And I was jokingly saying, and we can call ourselves the last Khoisan poets, because I was thinking of the last poets, the African-American poets. And it was kind of a joke, and it kind of stuck. And that's how we got that name.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, hopefully not too ancient.
Jenny is one of the co-authors of the first published translations of the Angel Island poetry.
When did you hear about Angel Island? Did you talk about it in school at all, or?
Oh, are you kidding? It was unknown. Yeah. Nobody knew about Angel Island except our parents, and they completely suppressed any information about that experience to their kids. There's something they wanted to, forget and to not burden us with that history. So they wanted us to have a more positive, happier experience. But I didn't hear about Angel Island until it was discovered in 1970 when the park ranger Alexander Weiss was walking around and found these barracks and saw these inscriptions. And he happened to be taking an Asian American Studies class and thought this might be of significance to Asian American historians. So he brought it to the attention of his teachers at San Francisco State. And then he brought Mark Takahashi, a photographer, and they went on the island. He brought in floodlights and photographed everything. And even after that, Alexander Weiss couldn't get the Parks and Rec Department to preserve the building. It was marked for demolition. It wasn't important to them.
Well, there was a big plan to make it into a fancy recreation area, right?
Oh, I think that was the plan, yeah. So once it sparked the community's attention, we alerted the community through the Chinese American bilingual newspaper, East West News. And we said, we've got to publish these poems. And so we took the poems that we got from the photographs, and they were published and translated in the newspaper.
Fortunately, local activism paid off. In 1976, California appropriated $250,000 for the preservation of the poetry and building. And after much initial rejection from traditional publishers, Island, Poetry and History of Chinese Immigrants on Angel Island, 1910 to 1940, was published in 1980, co-authored by Him-Mark Lai, Judy Young, and Jenny Lim.
And then while we were translating the poems, we thought it would be a good idea to also do oral histories. And so we approached whoever we could find, including our own parents and people in the community, and asked them, were you ever detained on Angel Island? And we asked our friends to ask their parents, and some of them came forward. A lot of them didn't want to talk, or if they did, there were things that they might not have wanted to share, such as we came over as paper sons.
Paper sons and daughters are people who attempted to enter the U.S. as family members of existing Chinese American citizens. They were sons and daughters on paper only.
Because there was never amnesty. The government never gave an amnesty for false paper immigrants. So that was another barrier that we had to deal with. A lot of the reticence, a lot of the fear, a lot of the shame.
I saw the poems in both Chinese and also English. Obviously, the Chinese original version, since I could read it as a first-hand person, I understand the language. It does strike me very emotionally and very deeply of the feelings and expressions of whoever wrote the poem. each of them actually has very similar things to say. Their feeling of sadness, anger, homesickness, and hopelessness. So all this was shown in almost every poem. There's no one poem is happy, I should say.
At this point, you may be thinking, why would anyone take on all this hardship? Why risk your life savings, your family, your health, your dignity for some shred of hope? There are many reasons, but basically, they were desperate. Meanwhile, the PR for the United States was strong, with promises of wealth and opportunity dating back to the gold rush. In fact, in China, California was often referred to as Gold Mountain.
We felt the urgency, and we knew that a lot of the immigrants had already passed, and some of them were in their later years, and then we would have to deal with their memory, how much could they actually remember of what happened. Most of them were teenagers, and some they were adolescents, and if they were there for just a week or two, they said, well, I don't remember much. They would forget everything, but the one or two things they would remember were seared in their memories. Like the women said, my mother remembered the women going to the window every day, looking for the boats that would come in from San Francisco, bearing the witnesses that would be questioned in the hearings. And many of them would be crying and looking at the window and weeping. So that she really remembered that.
Right.
When you look at the Angel Island history, it's like 50 years since we started.
Yeah, it's not long at all.
No. And I think Kim Mark, who passed, away in 2009, would be very happy to know that there's this big, resurgence of interest in Chinese American history because of that chapter on Angel Island. They're so graphic. I mean, you can walk in there and just feel that history. You could feel the ghosts. You could smell the wood. You could see the calligraphy.
There's something about being in that place.
Yeah. There was this conceptual artist from China, mainland China, and Marshall Trammell was collaborating with her on a project, and he told her to come to Angel Island. So we brought her into the dormitory, and after a few minutes, she said she had to get out. She said it was so oppressive, and she said she could feel the presence of the ghosts, the spirits in the room, and it was really dark, and it really upset her. And, there's something to be said about that energy in that room when you go in there, so in that moment, also experiencing what was happening to those detainees.
I could not imagine what they went through. I should say, the feeling of coming into a new place without knowing what is waiting ahead of you, the sense of unknown and the sense of homesickness, that I can relate quite closely. And, living in the States for this long now, sometimes, we do experience discrimination, even in modern day, still exists in our society.
Can you talk a little bit about the first time that you came to the island? What was that like?
I remember we woke up quite early, and the ferry ride, it was quite magical in that sense. It's quite scenic. You could see the Golden Gate Bridge. The island was surrounded by fog. And when we stepped onto the island, the sun comes out. I think only when you enter the building, the reality hits you. The museum did a great job of preserving the wall, the metal pole, and also the bed, right? You could see how the detainees were living. So many people in one room. Also saw the characters on the wall. They were still there even after this many years. And I look out from the barrack, you could still see some wire, to prevent people to escape. And you look out to the ocean through the wire, through the window, and then you see the Bay Area in San Francisco. Maybe that resembling freedom for the detainees. That's where they want to be. They could see that. They could see the lights. Almost like they could feel the heartbeat of that city, but they were contained on this island, not able to go set foot on that free land.
My parents were immigrants, but this is not my story. I can speak for Catherine, Ben, and Hae-young when I say, like Huang Ruo, we feel a deep responsibility that we honor all those who came before, who did the work to get to the point where there would even be interest in an oratorio, an opera, and now a podcast about Angel Island. In the coming episodes, we hope to illuminate a little bit of the mystery of what we do at Del Sol. We don't sit around strumming our harps on a cloud like angels all day. There's a lot of grit, struggle, and questioning. There's a lot of love and joy. There's a lot of humility. There's a lot of curiosity and good humor. And there's a lot of just being human. I think Del Sol has always been off the beaten path of what it means to be a normal string quartet.
And may I also want to add, the purpose of Angel Island ultimately is to create dialogues and to bring people together, and in hope that we treat people different from us in a better way than what happened, in hope that history will not repeat itself. But of course, we can't just ignore or cover the history. What happened did happen, but through showing the historical events, I hope people could learn about it and move forward from there to see our world a little bit different.
Sounds Current is a production of the Del Sol Quartet and the Del Sol Performing Arts Organization. Del Sol is Catherine Bates, Benjamin Creeth, Hae-young So-yoon, and me, Charlton Lee. This podcast is produced and edited by Andrea Klunder at the Creative Imposter Studios. Technical direction by Edwin R. Ruiz. Additional production support from Alex Riegler. Show notes by Lisa Witter. Cover art by Felicia Lee. Our theme music was composed by me and performed by Del Sol Quartet. Angel Island was composed by Huang Ruo with generous funding from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, with additional funding from the Phyllis C. Wattis Foundation and the Clarence E. Heller Charitable Foundation. Special thanks to Andrea Fellows-Feinberg and Don Feinberg, who believe our stories are worth sharing. And thank you to all of our guests and collaborators in the ever-expanding world of Angel Island. You can find links to all of the resources and partners mentioned in this episode in the show notes in the episode description in your app and at delsolquartet.com/podcast. To learn more about Del Sol Quartet and the Angel Island Project, visit delsolquartet.com.